Positively Kansas is also brought to you in part by Leavenworth Lansing Family Health Center. We specialize in all of you, bringing you this week's segment of My American Dream.
The following program is brought to you by TZ Productions, celebrating KPTS's nearly 50 years of community support in South Central Kansas. Great starts here on KPTS.
Brought to you by Central Security Group, your experts in home automation, security, and peace of mind. View video on your smartphone and control your home's lights, locks, heating, cooling, and more. Security app compatible with Apple Watch and Amazon Echo.
Program support provided by the F. Price Kosman Memorial Trust, Entrust Bank trustee, bringing you the Kansas Wild Edge segments on Positively Kansas.
It's time for Positively Kansas. Coming up, one of the most groundbreaking Supreme Court decisions in American history, and it was a case out of Kansas. Now, decades later, a new chapter in the story is unveiled at the state capitol. We have the story. Also, the movie Twister hit close to home in Kansas and made storm chasing hugely popular. 20 years later, we'll visit the town where it all happened and learn why the blockbuster film fascinates people now more than ever. Plus, some giant wild creatures have invaded the town of Derby and people are loving it. It's Kansas's answer to Jurassic Park. We'll take you on a tour and see what reporter Mike Blair found popping out of the ground in this week's Kansas Wild Edge. I'm Sierra Scott. Those stories and more are queued up and ready to roll. Positively Kansas starts right now. It was a major turning point in the quest for racial justice in American public schools, and its origins are right here in Kansas. Now the story of Brown versus the Board of Education will be told like never before for generations to come. Here's Jim Grayway with the new chapter that has been a long time coming.
It may seem hard to believe now, but there was a time not that many years ago when it was perfectly legal for Kansas educators to force white kids and black kids to attend separate schools. In the 1950s, some Kansas families said enough is enough, and they filed a lawsuit. The U.S. Supreme Court backed them up, and that helped bring about an end to school segregation nationwide. Now the story of this turning point in American history is being told in a new and permanent way at the Kansas State Capitol building.
I'm just so proud to be a part of it.
After years of planning and months of painting,
It's just such an honor.
artist Michael Young has a masterpiece worthy of the most prestigious building in Kansas.
Okay, I'm getting closer to my edge here.
He finds a crew to roll it up, load it up, and drive it from his studio in Kansas City to 8th and Van Buren in Topeka, also known as the Kansas State Capitol building. It takes a couple hours to install on this wall outside the old Supreme Court chambers.
It's just such a great feeling knowing that this is a part that I have a work in the state capitol, the great building of Kansas.
Then comes the gathering. It is quite the soiree. There's food. There are speeches.
Tonight is a celebration.
And then the big moment.
2, 3.
The mural is unveiled with all the epic excitement worthy of the history it depicts and the lives it'll touch for generations to come.
Oh, I love it. It is beautiful. Well done.
97-year-old Leola Brown Montgomery gives her approval. She's the mother of Linda Brown, who was the little girl at the center of the Brown versus Board of Education case in the early 1950s.
I was wondering if it would ever get made when they suggested it. I said, oh my, I don't know what better ever happened. but it has, and I am just so pleased.
This mural tells the story of the struggle and eventual success of ending legal segregation in American public schools.
I think it's awesome. It tells the story without any verbiage. It tells the story, you know, what they fought for, what they had to do within the law, and then right here in the middle, it shows the story of all children being educated together.
This was the first new mural at the Kansas State Capitol in 40 years. And it all came about because Kansas City educator Charles Jean-Baptiste went to the Capitol building one day to try to learn more about the Brown case.
So I'm wandering around the Capitol building, and this lady came out of the clear blue sky, Carol Campbell.
He was looking around like, so I jokingly asked him, was he lost or what was he looking for?
And I said, I don't know, but I have an idea that I haven't seen any mural or anything about the 1954 Supreme Court decision.
So I said, well, let's go and share your vision with Senator Hensley.
Carol works for Senator Hensley. He liked the idea and helped get legislation passed in 2010 that allowed for the mural if it could be done with zero taxpayer money. That obviously didn't happen overnight, but the Kansas African American Affairs Commission jumped in to help raise the more than $100,000 needed to make this finally happen.
It's a great piece of artwork. I think the focal point of this mural is in the middle, in the center of the mural, where you have the teacher and the integrated students that are there, and she's reading a book about the case. And to me, it just depicts, you know, what this case was all about.
We can read all we want to, but the memory of reading has a tendency to escape us, whereas we have a visual picture of what life was, what life is, and what life is to be. It's a big, beautiful story.
So there it is, now in place for good, a permanent fixture in the Kansas State Capitol, here to tell the story to generation after generation of this monumental Supreme Court case that originated here in Kansas that forever changed the course of American public education. In Topeka, I'm Jim Grayway for Positively Kansas.
The mural is sure to have a large audience. The Kansas State Capitol welcomes some 70,000 visitors every year, 40,000 of whom are students. We're also known for our severe weather here in Kansas. It fascinates and devastates. Terror wrought by tornadoes was dramatically depicted in the classic movie Twister. And now, more than 20 years after that film premiered, it's still creating a buzz among storm chasers and storm tourists who visit our part of the country. Correspondent Chris Frank shows us why.
Come on, guys, let's go inside.
The Twister Museum is easy to find on Main Street in Waukeeta, Oklahoma. Waukeeta is about 85 miles southwest of Wichita, only 6 miles south of the Kansas border.
How are you?
Waukeeta is a rural community struggling to keep its 2010 census population of 344 from fading away. That's an 18% drop from the 2000 census. The town's biggest claim to fame in recent years is being the primary filming location for the Hollywood movie Twister, shot here in 1995 and released the following year. The movie, starring Helen Hunt and Bill Paxton, is about competing storm-chasing teams pursuing an F5 tornado.
Let me explain how the Twister Movie Museum came to be here. This building on Waukeeta's Main Street served as the movie's home office while production was going on here. But once the movie was completed, well, Waukeeta's Garden Club took a hold of the building and turned it into the Twister Movie Museum.
Let me introduce you guys. How are you?
Hi. This museum makes Waukeeta a destination, particularly for tornado chasers and movie buffs who like the film.
I'll give you a tour here.
Linda Wade has volunteered at the museum since it opened. She's now its caretaker until she says she can get someone else to take the job. On this day, Lanny Dean, founder of Extreme Chase Tours, brings 3 clients to the museum after the group chased and spotted tornadoes the evening before in south central Kansas.
The movie Twister brought storm chasing mainstream.
And that, he says, opened up business opportunities for folks like Dean to offer tours while pursuing their storm chasing passion and alerting the public of severe weather.
So these doors came out of a set.
Several thousand tourists have traipsed through these doors over the years. Tourists place pins of their hometowns on maps here. One can see that the museum has entertained visitors from around the world. Linda says the movie Twister put and keeps Waukeeta on the map.
Waukeeta is well known around the world anymore because of the movie Twister. You can talk to anyone and say Waukeeta, and they eventually come up with the movie name.
Tourists often request the museum to be a part of their storm chase package's itinerary.
Yeah. I've got some Australian folks and then some folks from Austria and New Zealand.
Oh, good.
They mentioned specifically in email that they want to come.
Come to this
museum. Can we stop at Twister Museum? So I'm like, yeah,
sure.
You bet. Yeah, we'll do it. Yeah.
One of the things you learn here is why Waukeeta was selected for filming in the first place. It was because of a devastating hailstorm in June of 1993, which greatly damaged many of Waukeeta's buildings and houses. Waukeeta sought a federal grant to clear damaged uninsured buildings. Well, when movie producers learned of that, they made a deal to clear the debris after using it in the film's production.
It was a win-win for the town.
You can see how the debris was used in these homemade videos local residents shot while production was going on. Now, don't be surprised to find yourself mesmerized by these videos if you visit the museum.
Okay, so he stops. See, he pulls his pants up. That's the funniest scene I've ever seen in my life.
Linda says everyone in Waukeeta got to be extras in the film. Those are people you may see in the background of scenes.
And if you were an extra in the movie, they fed you, they paid you, and you got to see the stars.
And she says the star everyone fell in love with was Bill Paxton.
He was our favorite actor.
Paxton, she says, endeared himself to folks here by being so friendly and accessible when he wasn't busy acting.
What kind of a guy was he like? I heard he was just an awesome dude. You met him?
Paxton was very awesome. I had my picture taken with him 2 or 3 times, signed autographs for me.
Linda says Paxton, in his own off hours, walked Waukeeta streets, tossing a football around with anyone who wanted to play catch. Paxton donated that football to the museum on its 15th anniversary.
A really nice guy. He played football with all the kids.
How was Helen Hunt?
Helen Hunt was nice.
But Linda says Hunt had a bodyguard and simply wasn't as accessible as Paxton was.
And so I think Helen was probably a little intimidated by our down-home country folks that were here. And so she wasn't near as outgoing as Bill was.
But both are well represented in the museum. Besides his football, Paxton, years later, sent this pinball machine to the museum. The Sega company made pinball machines for Paxton with the theme of some of the action movies he starred in. Drop into the museum, and you too can put some pinballs into play.
Wow, that was cool. Yeah.
Well, this little museum about the movie Twister may have you making such exclamations also, while giving you an education about tornadoes, as well as an insight into the making of a Hollywood movie. In Waukeeta, Oklahoma, this is Chris Frank for Positively Kansas.
The Twister Museum is open from April through August, Tuesdays through Saturdays in the afternoon. Admission is free, but they welcome donations. And be sure to take cash because the gift shop doesn't take credit cards. Did you also know that Kansas is referred to in some scientific circles as the birthplace of paleontology? That's because so many scientific discoveries involving dinosaurs have been made here. Now, a new park in Derby is educating adults and kids about the dinosaurs of Kansas and surrounding states in a fun and informative way. Anthony Powell paid a visit.
There is perhaps no more fascinating sight to a child than that of a dinosaur.
The big and the war.
At Field Station Dinosaurs in Derby, there are enough dinosaurs to keep kids in awe for days, if not weeks. This 14-acre park took about a year to come together, thanks to private financing and bonds sold by the city. The mechanical dinosaurs were manufactured by a Chinese company, then shipped to Derby for assembly. 44 of the creatures that once roamed many parts of the world, including Kansas, are featured here. And because Kansas has been visited often by paleontologists over the decades, Field Station was designed in part to look like a dig site.
They discovered mosasaurs, which are aquatic animals from the age of the dinosaurs, and pterosaurs. So here in Kansas, those animals ruled the sea and they ruled the sky.
As Gazelle explains, Kansas was under the ocean at the time of dinosaurs, so that's why it was home to so many land and sea creatures. But he adds, bones of some well-known dinosaurs have also been discovered here. Meanwhile, back to present day, we found Stephanie Farner and her daughters roaming the park, full of amazement.
I was just like, whoa, because we saw all the long necks, huge necks, just above us. I heard a lot about familiar names of dinosaurs, and now I get to know what they actually looked like and how big they were.
So you put a face with a name?
Yes.
Kids are, of course, the main reason Field Station was constructed. Dinosaurs are something they can always relate to, unlike other things in childhood.
As they get older, one by one, all of the things that they believe in are taken away from them. There's Santa Claus, and there's the Tooth Fairy, and there's dragons, and they're all sort of taken away. But the dinosaurs, no one ever takes them away. They were real, they were amazing, they're cool.
Gazelle is proud that the park not only provides fun for children, but also a learning experience that is enhanced by interactive shows featuring staff members.
All right, welcome everybody to Field Station Dinosaurs T-Rex Feeding Frenzy, where we will use the scientific method to figure out what the dinosaurs ate.
We want every kid who comes here to leave here thinking that I am a scientist. Our whole day is about what it means to be a scientist, how exciting it is to be a scientist.
Here's another fun and unique feature of the park. It's called a geodesic challenge dome. It's the only one of its kind in all of North America, and it teaches kids what it takes to be a paleontologist by showing them the agility and strength and endurance the scientists must have when they're looking for fossils. So whether you're a kid or an adult,
knowing that they lived so long ago and they're finding fossils all the time of different dinosaurs and stuff, just kind of interesting to come and see what they might have looked like when they were alive.
Field Station Dinosaurs has something for everyone, a chance to learn while having lots of fun. An experience that's positively Kansas. For Positively Kansas, I'm Anthony Powell.
Park officials say it's not just Kansans who've been enjoying the park so far. It's also attracting guests from neighboring states like Oklahoma and Nebraska. And they expect folks from even further distances to be visiting in the future. We cover a lot of towns here on Positively Kansas, but there's one we've never visited, that is, until now. Mike Blair takes us there in this week's edition of Kansas Wild Edge.
It's sunrise on the Kansas prairie. A natural city is slow to wake up. It's a prairie dog town, and the stars of the show are in no hurry to begin the day. Prairie dogs, social diggers that live in colonies, are always late risers. Food is plentiful and close as a burrow entrance. There's plenty of time for the work of the day. Prairie dogs are the chief residents and engineers of their towns, but only certain grassland types will do. tall grass prairies, where dense grass grows more than 2 feet tall, restrict these animals' movements and ability to spot danger. Short grass prairies and overgrazed pastures, where grasses tend to be sparse and seldom get more than a foot tall, make ideal living and feeding areas. Generally, prairie dogs live in dry western parts of the Great Plains. Though these towns are dug by and for prairie dogs, a host of wildlife gathers there. The burrow networks make ideal shelters for rodents, reptiles, insects, and even birds. Watchful prairie dogs afford free predator warnings through their complex alert system. Sentries are always on guard to bark cautions of approaching trouble. So a variety of wildlife constructs their own homes within the borders of an active town. And this creates a huge community complex of animals and their predators. Prairie dog towns are excellent places to watch all kinds of daytime wildlife. Summer is a time of plenty when food is abundant and life is easy. Prairie dogs of all ages feed on grasses and forbs, keeping most vegetation trimmed 3 to 5 inches tall for easy viewing and communication within the town. Besides feeding, daily work involves digging and maintaining burrow systems. This important chore goes on year-round. As pups mature in late summer, they move out of their nursery and dig their own homes near the edge of the coterie. Tunnels average 4 to 5 feet deep and are usually around 25 feet long. They contain separate rooms for storing food, nurseries, toilet, and listening posts. Females will stay in the home area throughout their lives, but young males eventually move and establish their own breeding territories away from related females. For the same reason, mature breeding males often cycle into new coteries every year or two to avoid mating with their daughters. Resulting encroachments may lead to vicious fights and injuries. Not surprisingly, prairie dogs often conflict with man's plans for the land. Blamed for dangerous holes that can threaten and injure domestic livestock, and even competition for food that affects grazing, prairie dogs have been under assault since settlers tamed the prairie. And their tendency to invade croplands only heightens this battle. About 99% of all black-tailed prairie dogs have been extirpated in the last 150 years. But where they're still present, they provide a fascinating look at an iconic plains wildlife species. It's worth finding and visiting a prairie dog town to see these unique habitats. Indeed, it's a trip to an earlier time when the natural prairie still marched to its timeless rituals. I'm Mike Blair for Positively Kansas.
Next week, Mike will show us how to enjoy amazing wildlife encounters while sitting in your own car. That should be interesting. Now let's go to Macy Johnson with this week's installment of My American Dream.
Welcome back to My American Dream. I'm your host, Macy Nicole Johnson. I am joined here today with Dave Sanford, CEO of Grace Med Health Clinic. Thank you for joining me.
My pleasure, thank you.
So let's talk about it. Let's talk about your background. Talk about where you're from.
Well, I'm from Wichita. I was adopted when I was 8 months old by loving parents. My dad was a welder at Beach Aircraft for 42 years and had a stay-at-home mom. And at the time, I didn't realize that we were lower middle class. It really didn't matter, but that was my humble beginning here in Wichita.
So what inspired you to become a CEO, to strive towards great things?
Well, I think like most people, you just follow your journey in life, and when God gives you opportunities, you just take them. And so over my career, I had an opportunity to work in both the nonprofit and the for-profit sector. But GraceMed was really my prayer for over 20 years that I would be able to be in full-time ministry somewhere like GraceMed.
So what do you think GraceMed separates themselves from any other nonprofit?
I believe because we're a Christ-centered ministry, that we focus not only on physical health and mental health, but on spiritual health as well, that it really kind of sets us apart from most medical practices.
We talk about the American dream. I know you've heard of this term very often.
Right.
What would you define as your American dream?
Well, I think American dream is what can you give back to the community that supported you as you were going through education and through your early adulthood, and as you grow, what things are you good at? What can you do to apply those skills and abilities to serving the community?
Absolutely. So if there's a young kid who's looking at you who, let's say, is coming from a lower income background and they're looking at you as a CEO, very, very intimidating role, what would you say to them to inspire them?
Well, first thing I'd say is get a good education.
Right.
And then once you get your education, continue to look for vocational opportunities where you can apply your skills and your interest, and then just keep being faithful to whatever you've been called to do, and keep looking again for those opportunities that may present themselves as you grow older.
So did you face any sort of obstacles when you're working towards this big dream role? What kinds of things did you face coming to this role?
I think in a lot of jobs, you know, there's a lot of drudgery involved where you have to do the same thing day after day, but realize that doing those things really builds your future. And that when people see that you're committed to your job, opportunities come your way. So I'd say the first thing is education, and then once you find a job vocationally, continue to work hard to achieve your objectives.
So would you say that you have accomplished your American dream?
I really can. You know, part of it is my faith background, that I wanted to be in full-time ministry, but also God gave me the experiences along the way with various jobs in healthcare, so I could be in the right position at the right time to enter this role as the CEO at GraceMed.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining me today on another episode of My American Dream.
Thanks, Macy. Well, that's a wrap for this week. We're glad you took the time to watch. If you have a story idea, our email address is positivelykansas@kpts.org. We love hearing from you. I'm Sierra Scott. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll see you back here next time for another edition of Positively Kansas. So long.
Program support provided by the F. Price Kosman Memorial Trust, Entrust Bank trustee, bringing you the Kansas Wild Edge segments on Positively Kansas.
Brought to you by Central Security Group, your experts in home automation, security, and peace of mind. View video on your smartphone and control your home's lights, locks, heating, cooling, and more. Security app compatible with Apple Watch and Amazon Echo.
The preceding program was brought to you by TZ Productions, supporting KPTS and the communities it serves in South Central Kansas. Great starts here on KPTS.
Positively Kansas is also brought to you in part by Leavenworth Lansing Family Health Center. We specialize in all of you, bringing you this week's segment of My American Dream.